Let's make a quilt top with a layer cake. I had received this gorgeous layer cake called Hydrangea Dreams from my sister in a mystery box of fabric, and I received this pattern book for Christmas last year, and it's all based on using pre-cuts. This pattern is called Hidden Stars. The stars are not super obvious, but I picked up this lavender fabric at the Quilt Festival in Houston, and I thought that it would go really well with this pattern. I'm excited to get into this. I just love cutting open a new layer cake or jelly roll. It's just so fun. So this layer cake is 10-inch squares, and it has a lot of creams, tans, gold, navy, lavender, darker purple, pink, blue. There's a lot of different colors in it. I chose that lavender fabric as the accent color for the stars. For this pattern, you just need 1 layer cake and 1 yard of accent fabric. I've already pre-cut the yard of fabric into large squares and small squares. I can't give you the measurements because it's not my pattern, but I will put a link in the description to where you can buy the pattern book. And again, I'm using the pattern Hidden Stars. All of your layer cake squares get cut the same way. And so it's kind of fun. You can kind of get into a nice little rhythm, cutting all of your layer cakes into rectangles and then into squares, and then sub-cutting the rectangles down even a little bit further. These prints are gorgeous. Big hydrangea blooms. There's butterflies. There's like some cursive writing. Once you finish all of the cutting, the next part is to make 4 patches. And so we're going to take all of the squares that we cut out of our layer cake, and we're going to put them together, right sides together, and 2 at a time. And it doesn't matter here which 2 you put together, except that you want to choose 2 that are not the same. Here I have a green and one of the pink hydrangea florals. And the main thing is just to get 2 different colors. Like you wouldn't want to put a tan and a tan together. Here I have like a tan and a blue. And so just grab 2 different colors and put them together. We're going to sew all of those squares into two patches, and then we're going to sew the 2 patches into 4 patches. I'm going to press each seam to whatever I feel like is the dark side, so that when I go to put the sets of 2 together, I can make sets of 4, and I will be able to nest the seams. So sometimes it was 2 mid-tones, so just pick which one you want to consider your dark and press it towards that side. This is a great pattern for chain piecing because basically each step of the process you repeat so many times that you can get into a nice groove of just sewing. So I just had all my little stacks right to my left, and I was just able to pick up and piece together. So here I'm just pressing those the sets of 2 open. And again, sometimes it was 2 kind of mid-tones. And so I just had to decide in the moment which one was going to be my technically dark side and press it that way. The main thing is when I go to put these together into 4 patches, I want the seams to nest. So when I'm talking about nesting seams is that if I have one seam going to the right and one seam going to the left, I'm going to try to really nest those up with my fingers and have one seam going each direction. And then that way when I go to open this 4 patch up, it should be really nice and tight where my seams match. This was some kind of nice mindless sewing because it came together so easily, and you're working with such nice large pieces, and these fabrics were so gorgeous. And all I'm trying to do here is just make color combinations that I'm not putting 2 of the same color in the same 4 patch. I can kind of nest the seams now by feel. So I like to put them, next to each other and then just kind of slide them right up until I can kind of feel with my fingers that the seams are butting up against each other. And you can visually check it, but you can also kind of feel it. This may have been my favorite fabric line I've worked with. All the different colors and the springy, and we're actually in fall right now, it's October, but it was kind of very springy colors, but the mix of greens and blues and purples, it's just one of the prettiest fabric lines I've worked with. And then every now and then you would spot a little dragonfly or butterfly. It's just a really enjoyable fabric line to sew on. Here you can see I kind of audition just briefly my 4-patch before I sew it together, just checking to make sure that I like the way the colors are going to look. And so I just pick 2 and I kind of lay them up. Yep, those are four different colors. I've got navy, like a mid-tone blue, a green, and a pink, so this looks good. And so I just briefly audition and then go ahead and sew it together. If you wanted to take the time to pre-sort all of your sets of 2 into what the 4 patches were going to be to make sure your colors were balanced, I'm sure you could do that. This method worked fine for me on this project because there were so many different colors that just doing a brief check before I made the 4 patch, I came down to the end and I was fine. I didn't have a lot of duplicating colors. The next step is to iron these open. There's not going to be any nesting seams with the next part, so there's no worry which way you iron these open. And this is always where you finally get a chance to check and see how well did you line everything up. Are your seams nesting nicely? Is it, coming together well in the center? So I'm just pressing it to one side on the back, and I feel pretty good with how my seams are lining up. So these giant 4 patches go in between all of the stars, and the stars are made in a really fun way. Those large squares and small squares that I cut out of the lavender accent fabric that I bought, that's how we're going to make our stars. And it's technically sashing and cornerstones that go in between our 4 patches is how we're going to make the stars. And the pattern is called the hidden stars, and maybe it's called hidden stars because it's part of the sashing and cornerstones, and so it's kind of like a final reveal when you put your quilt together. Oh, yep, there's the stars. Okay, so that was quick and easy, and we have all of our 4 patches done for the entire quilt top. It's now time to move on to the sashing and cornerstones. So those large rectangles that we had earlier and the small accent squares are what we're going to use to make our sashing. So we need to take all of our small squares that we cut out of the accent fabric for the stars and draw a diagonal line. I'm using a heat erasable pen here, and this works well. I didn't have any issues with this. I'm just taking a small ruler and drawing a line diagonally from corner to corner on the back. There are other methods for snowballing corners where you use diagonal seam tape. I like to draw a line. I drew a line on all 124 little squares. But you put your little square in the corner so that the diagonal line is going from kind of the middle of the top down to the corner, so that when you sew and flip it back, it's going to snowball that corner. And this is called the snowball method or the stitch and flip method. And we're going to do it to 2 corners here. This is going to come together later to make the star points. So basically, this is creating star points on technically what is our sashing, these large rectangle pieces from our layer cake. So I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. I'm going to lay it on the corner, and I'm going to sew directly on the line. I am using a 2.5 inch stitch, not 2.5 inch, the 2.5 stitch length on my machine to sew this. So again, once you stitch on that line, when you fold that fabric back, and we're going to need to press this, but when you fold it back, it snowballs that corner. And now we're going to trim the bottom 2 layers away, about 1/4 inch away from the sewn line. I'm going to take my other little marked square and lay it on. I like to flip it around and start from the side that doesn't have as many seams. I just find it a little easier to get going from this straight side. And again, I'm going to sew right on the drawn line down towards that other triangle. So now we can fold this side back, and if you look, we've made a nice little point. We're going to trim this other side. This is also the method that is used for making flying geese, a very similar method, and you end up with some really nice points there. The squares that we cut out of our accent fabric, we're going to sew those on. I'm just showing you now. This is how we're going to make our sashing strips, is that we're going to snowball the corners, and then we're going to alternate those sashing strips with those large accent squares, and that is what is going to create our stars. And so this is 1/4 of the star now. The center of the star is the large square, and one of the pieces of sashing with the snowballed corners is what is making our star points. So the next step is to take all those rectangles that we cut out of our layer cake and add snowballed corners. Now the pattern tells you to snowball all 4 corners because it has star points that kind of just end on the outside edge of the quilt. But I went around and counted how many sashing strips go to the edge, and it's 14 sashing strips. And I chose for the ones that end up on the edge to only snowball to one side, 2 corners basically, because I didn't want unfinished stars around the outside of my quilt top. Now, this was a personal preference and sort of a change I made on the pattern. I think I liked it better. But that's where free will comes into quilting. You can kind of change things up. So for 14 of these sashing strips, I only snowballed 2 corners, and those are the ones that I'm going to put around the edge of the quilt, and then all in the center where it will actually be a completed star, I snowballed all 4 corners. Here you can really see the magic of the heat erasable pen, because there was my line, and as soon as I ironed it, the line went away. But I'm folding that corner back, and then I just need to take my scissors and trim the 2 bottom layers off. This lavender accent fabric that I found, I bought it at the International Quilt Festival that was in Houston. I bought it from the Gym Shoreline. They had some of this fabric, and I felt like the scale and the color really went well with this layer cake, even though it's not from the same designer or the same lines. I just feel like I kind of lucked out in finding this fabric, and I liked how it kind of had a similar size pattern to the hydrangea flowers petals. I realize I'm not being super efficient here. It's more efficient to do all your ironing and then do all of your cutting. And I was kind of going back and forth, but it's not always for speed. It's also about just the pleasure and the tactile nature of touching the fabrics and seeing what you're working on. And so there's definitely more efficient ways to do things, but there's also just the way that you enjoy doing things. So you can see in front of me, I have two different piles. One of the sashing strips that have all four corners snowballed, and those are gonna be for the center of my quilt. And then the pile on the right side there that only has two corners snowballed. And those are the ones that I wanna use around the outside of my quilt so I don't end up with any unfinished stars around the outside of my quilt block, around my quilt top. This is a very low waist pattern. You could probably do the trick where you add an extra seam to make a little teeny tiny half square triangle from what I'm trimming off of the corners. But honestly, what I'm trimming off of the corners is very small, little tiny pieces. And mostly this quilt top uses almost the entire layer cake in its entirety with very little waste. Okay, I've finished all of my pieces that I need. I've got my pieces that are going to go around the outside that only have 2 snowballed corners because I don't want unfinished star edges. And then I have my center sashing strips, I have my large squares, and I have my 4 patches. And this is everything that we need to assemble our quilt top. So we're going to take a 4 patch and a sashing strip. We're going to start with the bottom row here. So I have a sashing strip that does not have 4 corners, just 2. And I'm just going to try to lay this out so that I don't have any of the same colors touching. And it's going to end up being 4 patches and 3 sashing strips for the bottom row. And I'm just playing around with color placement here until I'm fairly happy that it's kind of balanced. I did not lay this all out on a design wall. I just did it all sitting here at my table, just making sure that I had the 4 patches and the 3 sashing strips that I needed for the bottom row. So I pressed all of my seams towards squares. So I pressed away from anything that had a diagonal snowballed corner. And so I just felt like it was easier to press it that way. And then when I went to add my sashing rows onto my other rows, it all nested really nicely. So I did not use a design board. I just laid everything out by my machine and it came together pretty quickly.